Jack Park. I'm Michelle Gatchell, and I am here with my co-host Roger Ingles. And in this episode, we are taking a look at the two teams playing in the All-State Sugar Bowl on January 1st. The Ohio State University Buckeyes, go Bucks, and the Clemson University Tigers. So let's get started. Jack, gosh, this is not the first time we've matched up against them, huh?
No, we're 0-4.
Oh,
It
no.
goes clear back to Woody Hayes' last game, actually on the 29th of December of 1978. And then we've played them 3 times more recently since then. And we've lost all 4 games. In fact, there has never been an opponent of Ohio State beat Ohio State 4 times without Ohio State at least winning once, other than Clemson University. So, so far, they've really had the upper hand on the Buckeyes, and I'm not sure that there's any one real reason for that. It's a variety of different things there, but it's time that we win one.
Jack, I think when I was looking at the all-time records, is it not, or isn't it correct that only 2 schools have won 4 more times against Ohio State than Ohio State has beaten them, and that's Clemson and that school up north? 4 more wins than losses. Let's put it that way.
4 more wins and losses. Yeah, that's. I think that's probably
Only
very
2.
true, Rogers. And of course, we're actually 6 games apart right now with Michigan at 52, 58, and 6. And of course, had we played this year, we'd be 5 apart, right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
But that's a good point. That's a very good point.
It's been interesting, and I think in this year being so different, it really seems like the Buckeye team, has bonded more, gotten in a groove with each other more. I hear many people talk about how the players are having the best year that they've ever had.
I think that's very, very true. It's been a very, very difficult year in terms of just safeness, of having the opportunity to go out and practice because of the virus, no fans in the stands. To play only 6 games, which was no fault of Ohio State's, that has been a disadvantage. Now, Ohio State's had since of course, spring football was canceled. And then once they got back into where they could start to have some types of practices, Ohio State has had about 75 practices since going back into, May, June, that area. And yet only 6 games. And a practice, and Roger, you know this better than me, you're a former coach, but a practice can be great, but a practice is not a game. And you need to play games. And these other teams that have played 10, 12 games, they have an advantage over Ohio State through no fault of Ohio State's. But that's just the way it worked out this year, and there's nothing that could be done about it, really.
Yeah, Jack, you're exactly right. As a coach, you need to play, and most teams always you get better by playing competition. And
Yes.
and that's something that Clemson's head coach Dabo Swinney has been complaining about in the media, that Ohio State has only played 6 games. And while it's a disadvantage in many people's eyes for Ohio State to have only played 6 because they haven't had the chance to really, as you said, bond and get better. It's also less wear and tear on their physical bodies because they haven't been out there 11 times against physical competition.
Yeah.
So Ohio State has to kind of take that into it and hopefully, bring a fresh set of legs and a fresh mindset into the bowl game to make up for the lack of experience that they haven't had.
Yeah. It was really unfortunate, I think, that the Michigan game was canceled. I'm not so sure Michigan could not have played that game. I saw a lot of reports coming out of the Michigan media's, basically sports information there, that they, in the entire Michigan athletic department, there were 13 athletes that basically had the virus and couldn't participate. I'm not sure how totally accurate that was, but I think, and that was the total, I don't know how many of those were football players. Even if all 13 of them were football players, I think they could have played. And they had a spirited practice on Monday, and Tuesday they canceled the game. So that is very suspicious to me, how that happened. That's neither here nor there now. That's gone. It's over the dam. We had played Michigan every season beginning in 1918. And of course, that was broken this year, which is in itself, as the old historian guy, I like to see streaks continue. And that was, of course, a big break in the greatest rivalry in all of college football. And but that's also hurt Ohio State by not having the opportunity to play that game, especially since it would have been a home game.
Yeah, a home game against good competition. You know, it helped them get ready for that playoff push. I think it would have showed a little bit in that Big Ten championship game. Ohio State kind of went into it a little bit flat. You know, obviously missing some key people. You know, Clemson had a lot of COVID issues early before the season started.
Right.
And then, of course, they had to deal with the big one when Trevor Lawrence was out for a couple games after testing positive. But Ohio State's had to deal with the COVID issue throughout the course of their 9-game season, obviously losing 3 games out of it. And they've had to play many games this year without their full complement of players. And hopefully here going into the college football playoff series now, we're going to see more of the true Ohio State team with everybody together.
Well, I think we will. And I think one big thing that was missing in that Northwestern game was Olave. And Justin Fields is a much better quarterback when Olave is in that one of those wide receiver positions. He is one of the finest, in my opinion anyway, he is one of the finest receivers we've ever had, ever. He really is. And it's been, you know, I've been trying to find out a little bit this week who's going to be able to play and who isn't going to be able to play. The information is being kept pretty tight. I think he's going to be able to play, and I think he's going to be pretty much back up to strength. And that will be a huge plus for Ohio State if he's in that lineup against Clemson.
Well, Jack, we mentioned, you know, Ohio State and Clemson are 2 of the 3 premier programs, I think, in the country right now.
Yes.
Since the college football playoff era has begun, Ohio State is 81-8, 91% winning percentage, and the Tigers are 89-9. They're second. And the team it's, of course, above both of them, it's had the highest success, but not that much more than the Buckeyes and Clemson's been Alabama at 89-8.
Yeah.
And Ohio State and Clemson have both just dominated their conference play. I think Ohio State's 58-4 in the Big Ten since we started the college playoff, and Clemson's 58-5.
Right.
But going into this, it's really been kind of it's 2 different types of football are being represented here. You're talking about the Big Ten and the national image of the Big Ten, slow and, you know, a bunch of plotters and, you know, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, which isn't true anymore.
No.
That's kind of the image a lot of people have of the Big Ten, where the ACC is still not that up and coming. They're not the SEC, although they like to think they are.
No.
As a conference, they have Boston College and Notre Dame were good football teams this year. Some of them were not. The competition Ohio State did face, I think, on a week-to-week basis was probably a little stronger.
Well, I think it is. There's no question about it that the Big Ten is a little bit stronger even this year, down through the ranks and everything. And but, you know, Roger, as you mentioned, when we get into the playoffs, I think there's, 132 Division I teams basically throughout the country. And this is the 7th year for the college football playoffs. And out of those 130-some teams, 4 of them get a spot in the playoff each year. And so over 7 years, there's 28 spots. And 11 teams have occupied all 28 spots. Only 11 out of the 130-some teams have done that. And Ohio State basically, you know, they've been in it 4 times. Alabama's been in it 6. Clemson's been in it 6. And Ohio State's had 4. Oklahoma has had 4, although they're not in it this year. And the only other team to have more than 1 is Notre Dame. This will be their 2nd year. But Oregon's been in 1, so has Florida State, Michigan State, of course, under Mark D'Antonio, Washington once, Georgia once, and, of course, LSU just once, but they did win it last year. So basically, you know, college football has become pretty much, you've got about 5 to 8% of the schools that are really dominating the sport right now. And I'm not sure that's good, but it is what it is, basically. And it'll probably be that way next year, too, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, I think it's those same schools you see every year dominate the recruiting and the recruiting rankings. And I think that's why you see a head coach like Dabo Swinney come out and make comments like he's made, you know, about Ohio State only playing 6 games and stuff. That's not meant for this game. That's meant for recruiting kids down the road. It's look, we're going to play 11 games. We're going to play a full complement. You go to the Big Ten, you're not going to get to play as many. You know, you have hopefully this is a one-time thing. But
I can't imagine Dabo Swinney thought that Ohio State did not want to play those other games. It was not Ohio State's fault. I thought that was a comment way out of left field some way. I'm not sure what he was trying to achieve there. I mean, I'd like to see him talk about his team, and we'll talk about our team, basically.
Well, looking at next year's rankings and the recruitings, Ohio State's finished ahead of them for the last 6 years in the national recruiting. I think that's what it was meant for, Jack. He's tired of getting beat by Ohio State on the recruiting trail, and he's trying to do whatever he can there. But talking about Clemson, there are some interesting names on that roster before we get into the big names. But there's a guy that played for Ohio State that's got a couple sons on that team.
Yeah.
Yes. I think his son Ty and Jake are both on the squad.
Yes, they are.
The head coach of Clemson, Dabo Swinney, also has 2 sons who are wide receivers on the team, Drew and Will. And the defensive coordinator for Clemson, his son, Brent Venables, his son Jake is a starting linebacker.
I didn't realize that. Okay, good.
Yeah. So you got some key names, and of course we're going to have a Herb Street of our own coming up here, I guess.
Starting next fall.
Yep, that sounds great.
Third generation too.
Yes.
Jimmy Herb Street, Kirk's dad, was a co-captain of Ohio State along with Jim Tyre in 1960. And Jimmy was out of Cincinnati. The Herb Street family then moved to Centerville. And Kirk, of course, played for Centerville High School and came here. He was John Cooper's first recruit. When John took the job going into the 1988 season, replacing Earl Bruce, Kirk Herb Street became John's very first recruit. And now, of course, Kirk's son now will be coming to Ohio State. And from all indications, he's a tight end. He had a pretty good year this year. And I think that'll be he's a preferred walk-on. And Kirk wants it that way, as opposed to taking, funds from scholarships that other kids could have. But his 2 twins at Clemson are basically preferred walk-ons, even though I'm sure quality-wise they could have had scholarships. So it's a good thing. It's really a good thing. And I'm sure the son will receive a lot of attention here next fall when he comes into Ohio State.
Well, going into this game, Jack, Clemson is very, very strong offensively.
Yes.
They have an outstanding, probably the number 1 pick in the upcoming NFL draft, and Trevor Lawrence. Obviously, he is a key part. I mean, when he missed the Notre Dame game, they end up losing at 47-40 in overtime.
Right.
And he comes back, they win 34-10 with him at the helm.
Huge turnaround from the first game. The first game out at South Bend, I think the first Saturday in November there, that went into overtime. Notre Dame used overtime to win that, which was a terrific win for, Brian Kelly and his team at Notre Dame. But of course, then it was so much more one-sided, the playoff game, once Lawrence was back in the lineup.
Yeah, and they have an outstanding running back in Travis Etienne. And not only, he's close to 1,000 yards. I think he's 924 yards on the ground. But he also is an outstanding receiver out of the backfield. And he's going to give Ohio State's linebackers and safeties some fits if they're going to try and cover that young man, because he can run.
Yeah. Now, I think Ohio State has a little bit better balanced attack than Clemson. I mean, I think our running attack is stronger than theirs, and combined with the passing attack with Fields and the Olave back in there. And we've got good receivers. Some of our freshmen receivers that had to play last week obviously lack experience. You could see that. And I think there were some missed routes there. And the fact that Brian Hartline was not there to coach, I mean, that makes a big difference. He's right down there on the sidelines with them, and he's talking to them right into their face when they come off the field. And some of those intangible things that were missing last week, hopefully, Brian will be back there. All indications that I've heard is that he will be, and that'll be certainly a plus again for Ohio State.
Well, one thing it wasn't missing was a running game in that second half. I know a lot of people were wanting Ohio State to run more early in the game, but Sermon kind of delivered, didn't he?
331 yards. That's something. What was he had in the first half? 62 yards, I think it was, or 66, something like that. But he had roughly 270 yards in the second half. And did you ever see, Roger, a guy carry the ball 29 times in a game and average 11 and a half yards? Yeah. 11 and a half yards over 29 carries. That may never happen again, really.
Well, and those young freshman receivers you're talking about, what they didn't get credit enough for, Jack, is that downfield blocking.
Yeah, yeah.
Because those young men did a great job getting up the field. And Thurman had quite a few holes where he got through the hole, but he made guys, he made guys miss, and he is a physical runner.
He has tremendous sight. I mean, he is really. He is. That some of that running last week was just so natural. You can't coach that. A kid has that. That just shows some of those very natural instincts. And it's one of the great games in Ohio State football history, one of the great halves in Ohio State football history. I was there when Eddie George had the 314, I believe it was, against Illinois in 1995. I think we won the game 41-3. The other thing I remember about that game is the temperature was about 15 degrees. I mean, it was one of the coldest games ever in Ohio Stadium. And that kid came out, and I think the first play of the third quarter, he ran off about 64 yards, and he had short sleeves on that day. He was out there. That was a game I'll never forget either. What a game. Eddie George, Illinois, 1995.
Clemson is bringing a good kicking game into this game.
Yes.
Their field goal kicker is one of the best in the country. I think he's 6 of 7 from 40 to 49, and he's 2 of 3 from over 50 yards. I think his longest is 52, and their punter is averaging about 43.5 yards punting. So if this gets into a battle of field position and the kicking game, Clemson's got to feel like they're in pretty good shape. But Ohio State's not bad in those areas either, are they?
I think Ohio State really has to play a ball control game too. I mean, that long drive that we had against Northwestern, it ended up with a field goal, but that reminded me so much of Woody Hayes. It was like 12 plays, took 6 minutes off the clock, and ended up because of the penalty there, we only got a field goal instead of a touchdown there. But I think we have to have some of those and keep the Clemson team off the field. You can't have a lot of 3 and outs in this game, or it'll be it won't last long. The game won't last long if we have a lot of 3 and outs.
Well, Jack, since Urban got to Columbus in 2012, Ohio State's had 10 losses.
Yeah.
2 were to Michigan State. 5 other schools, we've lost 1.
Yep.
In Clemson, we've lost 3 times too.
Yeah. I mean, it's only, he had 9 losses in 7 years. Of course, we lost a game to Clemson last year. That's the only loss that Coach Day has had so far and everything there. And, but there's still a few unexpected things. I was going over those same games this week and kind of looking back, Roger, and it's still hard to believe that Ohio State lost to Iowa and Purdue in those 2 games when Urban was here. And it's still, we had a 31-0 loss to Urban did to Clemson there at the end of the, 1916 season, I think it was. And the 2016 season. And, of course, Clemson went on to win the national championship that year, I think 35-31 over Alabama. And but that 31-0 is still hard to understand. And those things will happen. But quite a record. I don't know that we'd ever have a coach come in here and coach again in 7 years and lose only 9 games, although Ryan Day's got a good start on it right now.
Yeah, he does.
He does. Speaking of coaches, Jack, these 2 head coaches really have taken different routes to get to where they are.
Yes.
Dabo Swinney was, I believe, a walk-on wide receiver at Alabama. Yep. I think in his 4 years he caught 7 passes. Yep. Ended up being a GA there. Yep. Then I believe he went to Clemson.
Clemson.
He was at Clemson and was on staff there when they got rid of Bowden, and they made Swinney the interim coach.
Right.
And a lot of people at Clemson, especially that first couple of years when they were struggling, were not happy to have Dabo Swinney as their head coach. No. And wanted them to make some changes. And it took them probably 3 years or so to really get going and get their program in place like they have. Where Ryan Day, played at University of New Hampshire, was a starting quarterback up there, but he coached at several different universities. I mean, he was at Temple. I think he was at Boston College 3 different times, if I read that right.
And he was in the NFL 2 or 3 times too, not for long periods of time, but a couple of years out at San Francisco and 1 or 2 other schools.
Yeah, I think he might have been with the Eagles. I can't remember the exact other school, but
I think it
yeah.
was. Yeah.
Well, I think he was with San Francisco when Urban brought him back here as offensive coordinator. Yep. So he's been in the NFL. He's been in a lot of different places, and Dabo's pretty much been an Alabama Clemson guy.
Yeah.
So they've taken different paths, but they both have built very, very successful programs.
Yeah. And I guess for some people, and maybe a little bit me, when when Urban decided to retire, I think it was a little bit of a surprise maybe that Ryan got the job, but yet it wasn't. But he was only 40 years old. And I've heard people say to me, hey, he's going to do great. And he's going to go on and he'll probably go to the NFL someday and he'll do this and he'll do that. And then Luke Fickell will come back to Ohio State. I said, do you realize Luke Fickell is 47 and maybe 48 now, 47 or 48, and Ryan Day is only 41. So I'm not sure how that'll work, there. But and by the way, the University of Cincinnati has a tremendous game coming up New Year's Day. It's at 1:00. They're 9-0, 10-0, I forget, but they're undefeated, and they play the University of Georgia. And this may be the biggest game in Cincinnati history. I mean, to go into a bowl game, a New Year's Day bowl game, and play the University of Georgia that's only lost 2 games. Georgia is always one of the top teams in the SEC. And for Cincinnati to have an opportunity to have a perfect season now by winning a bowl game over the University of Georgia, that is a huge game for the Bearcats.
Yeah, Coach Fickell has done a tremendous job there, and I'm so happy for him and his program, and hopefully he can pull that one out. And anytime the SEC can lose in a New Year's Day bowl, that's
right.
rough, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've been kind of listening in to the player Q&As that they've had so far this week, and it's been fascinating. Both teams are talking about how great the other team is and how great it is to be able to play such a team.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, the respect that they have for each other. Coach Combs was talking about Trevor Lawrence, saying that he may be one of the greatest college quarterbacks of all times because he's fast. He can outrun the angle. I mean, he's deceptively fast, and that has really improved his game.
Yeah.
Yes, he's an outstanding talent. There's no doubt.
There's no question about it. But we've got a good one too.
Yeah, we do.
There haven't been many good games Ohio State has played in the last, just in the last, say, 10, 15 years, where I think we've had opposing quarterbacks with the talent of these 2 guys. And we're going up against a really great one. And we've done some other ones too. I mean, Penn State's had some guys, Michigan's had some guys. We've had some situations like that. But going up against Lawrence here with Justin Fields now needing a really great game because he's had a couple games that weren't quite as good as might be expected. So it's time for him to have his best game of the year, and I will not be at all surprised if Justin Fields has his best game of the entire season Friday night. It just seems like that's the way it's going to happen.
He from Clemson kind of gave the same thing to Justin, talking about how he is a Heisman, contender and how great he is. So they both are acknowledging the quarterbacks and how great they are.
Yeah, very much.
You're talking about potentially the number 1 and number 2 drafts picks in the NFL draft.
No question.
That's how talented these 2 young men are.
And let's don't forget about Tig too as a running back. I mean, I don't know if they would put both those guys in there at the same time. Probably not. We don't seem to run that offense anymore. Something like basically a wishbone formation, so to speak, that we at one time used to do, or even an I formation. But if you had both of those guys in there at the same time, that would give that defense some different things to think about, really.
The other interesting angle of this whole COVID season, if you will, is how quickly they went from last week's game into the playoffs.
Yes.
And it's the players, when they talk about it, some say that it's a benefit to not have extra days to overthink what you're about to do. And then some others are kind of bummed because they didn't have the extra time. And
Yeah.
it might be even more so just the whole idea. What I learned about the bowl site is the fun that they had as a team exploring the towns that the bowls are in
Right.
ahead of time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They don't get to do that. They're going down the day of and
We're
coming
going
back.
down, I think we're going down Thursday night, I believe.
Yeah, Thursday night. That's right.
We're going down Thursday night, play the game Friday night, and I don't know if they'll come back after the game Friday. They might. I mean, why not?
No, they are. They're planning on it.
I think you get out of there. It'll be they say 8 o'clock, but that game will probably not start till about 8:45. That's almost not, let's say, close to 9 o'clock. So the game will not be over until after midnight, and that's Columbus time. But I think they'll dress and then they'll bring them back here, and they'll probably get back in here around 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and that's certainly safer than staying another night in a hotel.
Yeah, I think the old coaching line, Jack, is they're going on a business trip.
Going on a business trip.
This
Right.
isn't vacation.
Yep.
Okay, we're not going down to sightsee.
Yep.
Going down to play a football game and win it and get ready for the next.
Well, you know, when Ohio State played in the Sugar Bowl at the end of the 1977 season, and it was Woody Hayes' idea, and I think it was not a good idea. But the game was against Alabama. It's the only time he ever coached against Bear Bryant. And those were two of the big coaches at that time. That's the only time they met. And they met in the Sugar Bowl there on January 1 of 1978, the end of the 1977 season. And Hayes, because he thought, it'll be a lot warmer to work out down in New Orleans, he actually took the team to New Orleans ahead of Christmas. They were down there about 12 days before the game, and it was too much. And guys would go out at night, and they'll tell you this, and they'd get down to the French Quarter and everything like this. And one late, I think after practice or something, it's after dinner, he wanted to call a meeting, and he couldn't find a lot of the players, and they'd gone down to the French Quarter. So he headed down there himself, and some of them, I guess, they were in one of the bars there, one of the places there on Bourbon Street, and word got in that Woody's coming in. And they all got under the table. There's all kinds of stories. And those things happen when you go out and spend that much time. I think taking a team to New Orleans would be one of the toughest ones to corral, basically, and keep them under control of any city you would go to, basically. And Miami to South Beach would be that way, too, a little bit. But I think New Orleans would be tougher.
Yeah.
I think New Orleans was the site when the Bengals were in the Super Bowl. They lost a running back because he couldn't stay out from the night before.
You're exactly right. Yeah, that's right. I forget his name, Roger, but he actually he did not play in that game at all, did he?
No, he did not.
Yep, I remember that now. Yep.
What a shame. What a waste.
Well, that's the other thing, Jack, that, it's worth mentioning here. The Rose Bowl, for the first time in how many years, is not being played at the Rose Bowl?
No. It was, of course, it's being played in Dallas now, and rightfully so. I did read one account this week that the game, this is the first year it's been played outside of Pasadena since, I think, 1917, and that's not quite correct. It's not a big deal, but at the end of the 1941 season, this is before the Big Ten and the Pac-8, as it was at that time, reached their agreement that their champions would play in the Rose Bowl. And at that time, there were only 8 teams in the West Coast Conference because Arizona and Arizona State didn't join until, I think, 1977. So you had the Pac-8, which was basically the 2 Washington teams, the 2 Oregon teams. And then in San Francisco, you had Stanford and Cal. And then down in Los Angeles, you have USC and UCLA. And that champion would play against the Big Ten champion. At that time, there were only 10 teams in the Big Ten, basically. And that started in 1946 there. Now, if you go back before that, though, the teams that played in the Rose Bowl were basically invited at the will of the Rose Bowl committee. And it could be any 2 teams in the country. Their objective was to get the best 2 teams in the country to play in the Rose Bowl, regardless of where they came from. And at the end of the 1941 season, they did. They had the 2 best teams in the country. They had Duke and they had Oregon State. And they were slated to play in the Rose Bowl on January 1. Now, December 7th of that year, of course, was the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And for reasons far, far more important than football could ever be, the government immediately said you cannot hold the Rose Bowl this year because of fear of another Japanese attack on the West Coast. It's just too close. In other words, don't gather 100,000 people there. That's a perfect attack site for the Japanese. So the Rose Bowl for a couple of days was canceled. And Wallace Wade, who was director of athletics at Duke, came up with the idea, hey, how about we play it on the East Coast? Would that be okay? And they were given permission to do that as long as Oregon State would agree to go to Duke. And Oregon State said, yes, we will come to Durham, North Carolina to play the Rose Bowl. And so there was 25 days between December 7th, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and January 1st. And they pulled that off.
Wow.
And you have to give a lot of credit to Duke University to arrange that and everybody else. But they played that game. Actually, Oregon State won the game. I think it was 20-16. And that was a Rose Bowl that was played actually at Durham, North Carolina. I've been in that stadium before. I've never seen a game there. I've spoken on the Duke campus a couple of times. And at lunch one day, I asked the meeting planner, can we walk over to the stadium? And I took some pictures. There's a plaque there on the outside of the stadium that this is where the Rose Bowl of January 1st, 1942 was played. I took a picture of that and everything like that. And there's a little bit of humor with it. When it was announced that the Rose Bowl would, instead of being played in Los Angeles and Pasadena, would be played in Durham, the Duke players mutinied. And I don't know how serious it was, but they said, we're not playing. We were guaranteed a trip to California if we could win all of our games. We won all of our games. Now you tell us we have to play this game in our own stadium, and we're not going to do it. Well, they talked them out. I don't know how serious that was, but there was a lot of hard feelings there among the Duke players that they didn't want to play that game at home. They wanted to go to California. Now, obviously, for reasons that they couldn't do that and everything, and that was pretty well smoothed over and everything. But there's just a little bit of humor connected to the fact that they didn't want to play the game in their home stadium.
So it's kind of like Coach Sweeney and Coach Kelly were not the first ones to say we're not going to go to the Rose Bowl. They weren't going to go because they weren't going to allow fans.
Yeah.
And so they were kind of throwing a little mutiny about that, but obviously gave in when they said we'll go to Dallas. So.
I've seen two games at AT&T Stadium. I saw the game where we beat Oregon at the end of the 2014 season. And then I was down 3 years ago when we played USC in the Cotton Bowl. And that is an unbelievable stadium. It's almost too nice. It really is. I mean, for football, it is. But I would encourage anybody, if you get down there for a game sometime, try to go early enough that you can take a tour. They offer different tours of the stadium. It's that magnificent. The tour is about an hour and a half, something like that. It's not real expensive for the tour, but it is really something. So if you get down there, I mean, try to go to the tour. When we went down 3 years ago, I think the game was like a 7 or 8 o'clock game at night. And we took a tour that morning of the stadium, and it was really worth the time.
Very cool. Definitely have to do that. You know, we've been talking a lot of football, and the other part of our football players' lives is school. And a cool stat that OSU put out today is 21 players on the Ohio State roster are already college graduates.
Right. Yep.
And that's pretty cool. But on top of that, since Ryan Day has been coach, we've seen the average GPA go from a 2.73 to this year a 3.19 in autumn. So
yeah.
That's a good deal.
Now, Michelle, I saw that notice come out of the sports information office, and I'm just doing this from memory. I don't know that this is a fact, but I pay attention to those. I don't chart them or keep track of them or do averages, but I sure look at them, and they come out of Jerry Emmig's office, their sports information director. I cannot remember an Ohio State football team having better than a 3-point average for a particular term. Now, it may have happened. And Woody Hayes really emphasized academics. He really did. And just ask some of the players that played under him, they did. But I don't remember any of Woody Hayes' teams being more than a 3-point. Maybe there were, but if there were very few. And that's quite an accomplishment. It really is.
There's a lot of people that need to be thanked for that. I mean, obviously your head coach has got to set the tone, and your coaching staff, position coaches, that academic support group there in that athletic department. do a lot of work with those young men and young women in that department to make sure that they're on the right track academically and getting the stuff done that they need. And, Michelle, this fall has been a unique fall to be taking classes. And I'm sure that, the online nature of many courses and things really had to play a part in it as well. As you can't miss class very easily if you're online and they're keeping track of you. So,
well, and with COVID, they couldn't go out and party. They couldn't go out and socialize. They had nothing to do other than study, really. And they kept them all together in a study hall and made sure that they studied. So there was no getting out of it.
A lot of those players did not go home for Christmas either. And that's quite a sacrifice, because, had it been just normal conditions, no COVID or anything, just a normal atmosphere, those kids would have gone home for Christmas. And oftentimes, too, some of the players that live quite a distance from Columbus that get recruited maybe from California or the East Coast or so forth like that, a lot of times some of the Columbus area or Ohio area kids will take a teammate or two home to spend to spend Christmas with their family because of the time to get back and everything like that. And of course, they didn't have the opportunity to do that this year. Really, it was just been a different year.
Jack, one of the interesting stories I saw here in the last week or so was that Clemson and Alabama were both letting their players go home at Christmas.
Yeah.
And this is going to be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks.
Yep.
From a COVID standpoint.
Yep.
So
Alabama's got quite a team. I mean, Notre Dame's got their work cut out for them in the first game on Friday. And of course, I think our game will be a little closer. I don't know. Notre Dame, it's hard to say. I mean, I think they may exceeded expectations this year, and Brian Kelly has probably done his best job as coach at Notre Dame this year. They had a pretty tough schedule. They really did have a pretty tough schedule, and they won all but that last game, which they got beaten pretty badly, of course, in the last game. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do against Alabama. And we got two really great games coming up after that great game of Georgia and Cincinnati. I don't remember a New Year's Day with three games quite as big as this. I really don't. Luke Fickell's a good friend of mine to start with, and it's an Ohio team. And then, of course, you've got Ohio State. And then my business partner, my co-author, Maureen Zapata, she's one of the strongest Notre Dame fans you ever see. She graduated from Notre Dame. So I guess I've got an interest pretty strongly in all three games coming up on Friday.
Which of the two teams that we could possibly play, Notre Dame or Alabama, would be a better game for us?
Well, I think, in my opinion, the Alabama against the winner of our game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Michelle, the way I look at it is obviously we have a tough fight on our hands with Clemson, a game that I believe Ohio State can and will win. But I also think that if you're going to win a national championship, you want to beat the best team out there. And so I would look forward to, being able to play Alabama in a championship game if we can get through that New Year's Day game. But I have to say, I think this is the best Notre Dame team I've seen in quite a while. And that quarterback for Notre Dame is one tough young man. And he has played great all year. And has really impressed me. But I think overall, the talent and everything that they have in South Bend this year is as good as I've seen in a long time.
That kid Book from Notre Dame has played hurt too. I mean, he's been hurt some games, and he's played through that. He's a strong kid. He really is a strong kid, and they'll need real effort from him on Friday against Clemson for sure. Against Alabama for sure.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for tuning in with us and filling us in on what the possibilities are coming up on January 1st, because what a day to watch a bunch of football.
Yeah. Be a great day, guys.
Yep.
Go Bucks.
Thanks for having us. Go Bucks.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to be back with you, Roger, Michelle, and everything. Go Bucks. So we'll talk again real soon.